Good afternoon, everyone. Mark Fitzpatrick for the Tiger Club of Kansas City. Welcome once again to our Zoom call for Tuesday, March 9th. Our guest today is ESPN's baseball insider Jeff Passan, a former KC Star reporter who still lives in Prairie Village with his family while covering all things MLB for ESPN. As always, I'd like to thank our Tiger Club sponsors, Chicken and Pickle in North Kansas City, tigerboard.com, Conrad's Restaurant and Ale House in Liberty, Sports Scene in Lee Summit, and Stables Grill in Kearney. And a tip of the hat to Darren Wydick for engineering our Zoom calls, and for Paul Blackman and Barry Canner for lining up our excellent guests each week. Visit our website at kctigerclub.com for information on what's going on with the club. You can now save the date for the return of our golf tournament. It is now slated for July 26th at Lakewood Oaks and Lee Summit. We're very excited to have that back after an absence last year. More information on that to come. Some news and notes on Mizzou sports. The men's basketball team plays at 6 p.m. Thursday in the SEC tournament in Nashville as the 7th seed. The Tigers take on Georgia. The game will be televised along with all the tournament games on the SEC network. This morning, it was announced that Drew Smith was named to the coach's all-conference first team and to the all-defensive team. Jeremiah Tillman received second-team honors. Missouri sends 2 runners to the rescheduled NCAA cross-country championships next Monday in Stillwater, Oklahoma. It seems funny talking about cross-country in March, but that was postponed from last fall. Seniors Kieran Wood for the men and Sarah Chapman for the women both finished in the top 5 last October at the SEC championships. Now let's turn to our guest, Jeff Passan from ESPN. Jeff is a native of Cleveland and a graduate of Syracuse University. He came to Kansas City in 2004 to cover the Royals for the Star. He joined Yahoo Sports in 2006 before moving to ESPN in 2019. He is also the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Arm, which was published in 2016. Jeff, thanks for joining us today in what is a very busy time of year for you, I'm sure. What's it like covering spring training during a pandemic?
Well, I'm very thankful for the 72-degree day that we finally have here in Kansas City, because when I was actually in spring training in Phoenix, Arizona last week, it was 72 every day, and we still had snow on the ground when I left here. So it's a little more palatable when it's a nice day out here and I can walk outside and make phone calls, as opposed to huddle by my fireplace and just sit there and look outside and be saddened by the snowscape that was there. Though it's so much more like my average pre-pandemic job than you think it would be. It used to be that I was out and traveling a lot more, but I spend a lot of time on the phone these days and a lot of time texting. And on the iPhone, at the end of every week, it says how many hours a day you spend on your screen. And I'm horrified every time that thing pops up. Like, I want to punch my phone because it shows me that I'm spending well over a third of my life sitting in front of this godforsaken thing and just doing ba 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 ba. But that's a lot of what my job has turned into. And the beauty of ESPN is that I get to do myriad things. I can do something on TV. I can go on the radio. I can do a documentary. I can do a long form feature in addition to the news breaking stuff. But the news is really the focus of the job. And to get news, you just got to spend a bunch of time on the phone, talking to people, keeping up with contacts, trying to figure out what's going on in the sport. And so in that respect, not a ton has changed. It hasn't been as obtrusive, I think, to my job as it has to other people in the journalism industry, or certainly people in other industries.
I want to talk to you about how you're going to tell us how the Royals are going to win the World Series. But before we do, I want to talk to you about the article you wrote last month about Drew Robinson. And if our viewers haven't read it, it is a must read. Drew was a outfielder in the Giants organization, had some brief stints in the major leagues with the Rangers and the Cardinals. And last April, he tried to take his own life by shooting himself in the temple. And he lived. And I will turn it over to you. How did you come onto that story? How open was he to discuss the situation with him? Because it's a very intimate portrait. You obviously had a lot of discussions with him and his family. Tell us about the story.
Yeah, this is not the story that you can tell without immense amounts of cooperation from the subject. Just ethically, like this is his story. And I had heard from a mutual friend that this had happened, and this was back in May, and that Drew might want to talk about it. And I thought to myself, well, let's give it a little bit of time, see, how he gets through his recovery and if he's still considering at that point wanting to do so. And August comes around and he was still, he still desired to have this story be told. And, he feels like he's here and he survived because he has a purpose in life now. And that purpose is to go and tell people that all of the things that he went through, the cycles of depression, the low moments, the sadness that tormented him, it doesn't have to be that way. That there are people for you to talk to, that you should have those difficult conversations because people are wanting to hear that from you, because people do love you. And Drew's journey from not just the moment that he pulled the trigger to now, but the time, from the beginning of his life to when he pulled the trigger, the latter informs the former. He would not be who he is today and where he is right now if not for those struggles and those difficult moments. But the fact that he ended up losing his eye and still is trying to come back and play baseball right now and sign a minor league deal with the Giants and is in a good place, not a place where he can be complacent or where he can sit around and act like everything's okay, but in a place where he is healthy and understands better than he ever has how to remain that way. It is a sad story, but ultimately I think it's a triumphant one. And it was just a great privilege to get to tell the story in the written form. And there's a 60-minute documentary on ESPN Plus as well that I'm incredibly proud of. If I do a better story in my life, I will be surprised, because this feels like the about as good as it can get for a non-book story that I haven't spent many years working on.
It's a remarkable piece of writing. And again, I encourage all our viewers, go to ESPN. It said San Francisco Giants outfielder Drew Robinson's remarkable second act. And I have not seen the documentary, but I hear it's great. But anyway, great work on that. I thought you handled it with sensitivity. And he also was very informative and also encouraged people to seek help. You did a great job.
Thank you. And it's, that's a hard topic to write about. I mean, suicide is a very third rail issue in society still. And it's something for generations that we just didn't talk about. But the reality is that it's a giant problem in our world right now. And the more that people know, the more that people understand, the more that they recognize what resources are out there, and that they see there are people like Drew who were able to get through what they so many times feel like they can't get through. To me, this was as much as it is a story of one person, it was a public service piece, because Drew wants people to look at him and say, I can be like him and I can make it. And that's the whole, that's the whole point of this thing.
Well, again, great job. Let's talk about the Royals. They're pretty aggressive by their standards during the off season, and with 5 of their everyday players of the projected lineup are now between 29 and 34. They look like they're trying to make a serious push for the playoffs this year, even in an improving AL Central. What are your thoughts on their prospects?
They're a really interesting team. And if they were in like the National League Central, I might have them making the playoffs this year, even though it's not expanded playoffs. We have the, the same playoff format that we did back in 2019. Last year, there was the expanded playoffs, of course. This year, there's going to be contracted playoffs. Next year, there's going to probably be expanded playoffs again. So baseball needs to figure out what it's doing. But with only 5 playoff spots, and with the New York Yankees as good as they are, the Toronto Blue Jays making a push, the Tampa Bay Rays as good as they are, having gone to the World Series last year, with the White Sox and the Twins both really good, the Indians a solid team, and then you got a crapshoot out west, whether it's the Astros or the A's. There are a lot of teams that could say, on paper at least, we're better than the Royals. But what the Royals have done by bringing in Carlos Santana, bringing in Mike Minor, Michael Taylor, I think is going to be sort of a sneaky good signing there, taking over in center field, trading for Andrew Benintendi. Like, there are definitely a lot of possibilities for things to go right for the Royals. And ultimately, it's going to come down to their young starting pitching, of which they have a lot, and just how aggressive they're going to be with some of their prospects, whether it's Asa Lacy, who was their number 1 pick last year, Daniel Lynch, a big, tall left-hander who might be the best pitching prospect in the organization. A kid like Alec Marsh, who really took a step forward at the alternate site last year. And I imagine everyone here saw Bobby Witt Jr.'s home run yesterday and enjoyed it very much. And where he slots in when he arrives, I just don't know at this point. Like, he's a big leaguer right now. He could be, he should be, but where do you have room for him? Does he play shortstop? No. Adalberto Mondesi was the best player for the last 30 games in Major League Baseball last year. Does he go to third? No. Hunter Dozier's there. You just signed him to a long-term deal. Does he go to second? Possibly, but they love Nicky Lopez's glove there, and they think that he can hit. Do you stick him in the outfield? You got Taylor in center. You got Benintendi, who you traded for and left. Whit Merrifield, you're not going to move him out of right. And Jorge Soler. I've just gone over the whole lineup. It's a pretty good lineup. And that's why there's optimism right now, because I think they're going to hit a little bit. I think they're going to pitch a little bit. And I think their bullpen, with Josh Staumont, who I especially like, Greg Holland back there as well. Scott Barlow was fantastic last year. Wade Davis, Kyle Zimmer. It's a little bit of bringing the band back together. They're an interesting team. That is the best way to put the Royals in 2021. They are a very interesting team. Do I see them making the playoffs? No, probably not. But that's more about the strength of the other teams in the American League as it is weaknesses with them.
We've had a little over a year with John Sherman as the owner. What are your thoughts on him and his time as owner of the Royals so far?
In an off season when very few teams were spending, he spent $18 million on Mike Minor. He laid out 2 years for Carlos Santana. He gave them the go-ahead to trade for Benintendi, who is going to be around for 2 years as well. He's got this year and another arbitration year where he could be making a pretty large chunk of change. Signed Dozier to that long-term extension. They've had discussions about long-term deals with some other guys. Don't know if those are going to happen or not, but those are always in the offing. John Sherman's been great so far. And I think that he's got a ton of respect around the Kansas City metropolitan area, just in terms of who he is as a person and what he's done. And he has not shown anything to lead you to believe that he is going to be anything other than a very good owner. And listen, is he going to be one of those guys who goes and, spends $200 million to put together? No, we're not going to have that. But I could see him operating in a fairly similar fashion to how David Glass did at the end of his tenure, with the Royals. When they were good, he spent money. When they weren't, didn't spend quite as much. But in those years, when you're trying to win a World Series, you ramp things up And I can see John Sherman doing that, especially, if in addition to Brad Keller and Brady Singer, some of these pitchers come up and really forge a dynamic young rotation. They're going to need some compliments to that. And what those compliments look like, that's going to take money.
We're talking with Jeff Passan, but MLB insider for ESPN. If you'd like to ask Jeff a question at the end of our discussion, please click on the chat feature. Jeff, I want to talk to you a little about labor negotiations. Always interesting in Major League Baseball. Collective bargaining agreement will come up after this season. Why does baseball continue to have such an adversarial labor situation compared to other sports?
All right, so let me pick a slight bone of contention with your premise. When was Major League Baseball's last labor stoppage?
1994.
That is correct. In between then and now, the NBA has had a labor stoppage, the NFL has had a labor stoppage, and the NHL has had a labor stoppage. So now, that being said, the current state of affairs between Major League Baseball and the Players Association, it's not good. Like, it's definitely not good. And depending on who you talk to, there are absolute pessimists who see the collective bargaining agreement expiring on December 1st without any real without any hope of a new deal. And there are some people who are more pragmatic, who look at it and say, who the hell kills the golden goose, right? Like, we have this situation where we have a multi-billion-dollar industry. Are we really, in the wake of this pandemic, going to voluntarily give up the money that we're all set to receive and to share in? And when you look at it from that perspective, any labor negotiation is kind of stupid on the surface, right? Like, if we have this huge pot of money, can't we just figure out how to divvy it up among ourselves? The problem, of course, is that the players have years of feeling like the owners have just tried to stick it to them in a number of fashions. And that the last few labor negotiations, after historically going the players' ways, have gone the owners' ways. You've got some light feuding among owners as well. And this is nothing new, but this is the large market versus the small market. And when you have a sport that has revenue sharing, there's always going to be dissension among the owners. The large market ones angry that they have to give money up and feeling like they're funding the small market teams, and the small market teams feeling like they're at a disadvantage because the large market teams can go out and spend more than they can. So there's always the animus there. So it's not just like a bilateral thing where you have baseball and the Players Association, they have to come together. You have baseball that has to get its house in order first, figuring out how to bring all of its owners together. And then and only then can they have reasonable discussions with the Players Association. Even the Players Association can be bifurcated. There's that group that wants to fight, and there's that group that wants to get a deal and doesn't want the gravy train to get derailed. So there are all kinds of things to figure out between now and December 1st. And Mark, I got to tell you, that's not a lot of time. It's not a lot of time for the number of issues. Now, is there the possibility that there could be a lockout on December 1st that lasts for a month or two, and then there's a frenzy before spring training to get free agents signed and all? Yeah, that's a possibility that they have a labor issue, but they don't wind up missing any games. But I think if this thing gets rolling, it could get ugly very, very quickly. And I'm hopeful that they can figure things out between now and then. As fast, like I say this, it would be fascinating to cover a labor stoppage, just because the politics of it all really like intrigues me as a as a person, as a reporter, um, eh, I would love to see what that looks like, but as a baseball fan, no, hard pass. Please, let's just let's get this thing signed and go play some baseball.
Couple of negotiating points, which I don't really understand. You had mentioned the playoffs are going to go back to 2019 format, although the statement was that the universal DH and the or expanded playoffs were unlikely. So is that a done deal, or do you think they're leaving the door open on that?
I mean, what are we, 3 weeks away from opening day? Now, granted, expanded playoffs got done literally on the eve of the season. I remember walking through Washington, D.C. the night before opening day and talking with somebody about how the playoffs were going to be growing in size. So there is always that possibility. But in order to do that, there would have to be some kind of compensation that the players get. And right now, it's just, the owners are not willing to give what the players want. The players are not willing to receive any less. I think they look at expanded playoffs like if it's going on 2 years in a row, that there's the realistic possibility that they may not get anything in exchange for it during the collective bargaining negotiations, even though it's not part of the current basic agreement. They're worried that it would be treated that way. They want to have a chip, and the expanded playoffs are unquestionably a chip.
I want to talk to you about your book, The Arm, which was published in 2016, New York Times bestseller. You did an intimate study of Tommy John surgery to the point of even sitting in on an operation, if I recall. Part of the question that came from that book was the long-term contracts for pitchers, and they're so brittle. So prior to 2020, Garrett Cole signed a 9-year deal with the Yankees. But this year in the offseason, I think the longest pitcher contract was 3 years. Are people listening to you after your book, you think?
I don't know if people are listening to me so much as they're trying to remake the market. Now, Trevor Bauer admittedly could have signed a longer term deal. Like, I think there would have been teams out there willing to give Trevor Bauer 7 years. He wanted a shorter term deal when the money for the longer term deal wasn't at the Garrett Cole level. He made a decision, which was, I'm going to try to essentially go year by year. He wound up signing a 3-year, $102 million contract with the Dodgers. But 40 million of those 102 are in the first year. 45 million of those 102 are in the second year. So essentially, he got a 2-year, $85 million contract because he can opt out after either the first, second, or third season. And the assumption is that he'll spend 2 years with the Dodgers and opt out after that second season. That being said, I see a guy like Jake Odorizzi this offseason who, for 6 years prior to last year, had averaged 165 innings and 30 starts a year. And he wound up getting a 2-year deal with the player option. And this wasn't the greatest pitching class by any means, but the way that pitcher contracts were handed out, it was not good. And I do think there is not just some reticence from teams, but I think the instinct of teams right now is to overpay in dollars for shorter years. What Garrett Cole got was because Garrett Cole was probably the best free agent pitcher ever. And that's not prisoner of the moment. That's not exaggeration. The year that he was coming off of, the stuff that he had, the age he was, the personality, all of those things, he was the entire package, which is why he was able to get $324 million. I mean, it was a monumental deal. And if you look just a couple days, I think it was 24 hours earlier, Steven Strasburg had gotten $245 million, which is sort of what people thought Cole was going to be getting. So the idea that he got another $80 million or so within 24 hours, that was like an industry shaping deal right there. And it is unique, and I don't anticipate any other pitcher is going to be getting anything like that anytime soon.
What was the reaction of people inside the game to your book and the detailed study you did about arms?
It was really good, and it's still nice that people 5 years later bring it up and talk about it, and respect the work I try to do. I think people who read it were just like me, frustrated that at the end I didn't have some sort of solution or panacea to this. And it's interesting personally now because my son, who was like 6 when I started reporting this thing out, um, and who I really wanted to study it for, is now 13 and is good. And every time he throws a baseball, it scares the shit out of me. Like I genuinely, like, the last thing, and this is wildly selfish of me. The last thing I want as a parent is for my child to potentially have to go through anything. But the last thing I want is the person who wrote the book on the arm is to have a kid who needs Tommy John surgery. So I'm really hopeful that he's got a beautiful delivery. He's got really good coaches who have taught him well, and it's been nice to see him blossom. And I'm going to be really curious to see what life is like for him. I'm living vicariously through him because he's good. And I don't know what these next few years are going to look like. I mean, it depends. Does he still have passion? Does he still love the game? Does he still want to play? How much time does he want to dedicate? What's the effort level there? How much does he care? And that's all up to him. He's going to figure that out, and he's going to be the one who tells us just how much baseball matters to him. And he's going to be the one who figures out how his arm can work best and what its potential is.
One thing you mentioned in that book, which surprised me, I was always a big Nolan Ryan fan and how durable he was. And you mentioned in the book that he was told to have Tommy John surgery.
Oh
Isn't
yeah.
that correct? And he declined it. How could he pitch through it at the level that he did?
He's a freak. I mean, there's just, there are outliers in life that's the only reasonable answer that we have, because I don't think we know enough about individual anatomies at this point to be able to say Nolan Ryan was able to pitch the way he did with the physiology that he had because X, Y, and Z. We just don't know what X, Y, and Z is. And I think we might be getting there. I think that may be something that in the next 10 to 15 years, as technology improves, we may have a better sense to be able to like we can do right now motion capture type situation. So markerless motion capture is you use cameras, and the cameras figure out what the joint angles are, what the speed of the arm movement is, what the degrees of rotation are. I mean, it's amazing what we can see. And when you take some of that data and break it down, if a pitcher gets hurt, if multiple pitchers get hurt, maybe there's some sort of correlation that you can find with where the arm angle, where the angle of the shoulder is, or what the external rotation of the shoulder is, 5 pitches before the person gets hurt versus at the beginning of the game. And maybe in the middle of the game, then if you see a pitcher showing or exhibiting signs of this, you can say, okay, shut it down. We don't want you to go get hurt. That's the hope. But how realistic is any of this? I don't know. It's it's optimistic to think we're ever going to be able to solve this, but hopefully, incrementally, we can figure out how to at least make it better for the next generation.
You ready for some questions?
By all means.
All right. Nice. You talked about Bobby Witt Jr.'s home run yesterday. It's only spring training, but since it was such a monstrous shot, do you take a little more out of it than just a normal spring training home?
Here's why I took something out of it, because it was off a big league pitcher. It was off Yusmeiro Petit, a guy who's been a big leaguer for 10 years. And he doesn't throw hard. He never has. He's sort of a workmanlike, innings eating, well above average middle reliever. But that well above average matters. It's not like this was off some sort of piddling minor leaguer. No, this was a big league player, and he hit it 484 feet. And that is gargantuan power. That's in probably the top 1% of all baseball players in the world right now. Not just minor leaguers. No, like he's up there with Giancarlo Stanton, with Aaron Judge, with Mike Trout, with Bryce Harper, with Fernando Tatis Jr., with Juan Soto, with Ronald Acuna Jr. I mean, this is elite level power. And to see that, I'll be honest, I didn't think Bobby Witt had that much power. But clearly he's been drinking his milk this offseason. And it's nice because he's not just a power guy. Like, he is extremely fast too. And he's really good in the field. And he's got a great arm. He's got a good eye at the plate. And he can hit for average. Like, he is a genuine 5-tool guy. So I don't know where he's going to end up. I would venture to say third base. But it's almost like even if he's at third base, it takes away from his athleticism. But even if he's at second base, it takes away from his arm. Like, it's not a shame the Royals have Mondesi, because we saw how good he could be in September of last year. But it's almost an embarrassment of riches that they have Mondesi and Witt, two guys who could be good big league shortstops today. And it's been a half decade since we've said the Royals have an embarrassment of riches. It's been an embarrassment of other things in the interceding years.
Interesting story you had on Lou Gehrig Day in MLB. What are your thoughts on how that came about?
It's a very cool story, actually. They have Roberto Clemente Day. They have Jackie Robinson Day. Lou Gehrig has been tied inextricably to baseball, not just because of his Hall of Fame career, but because of how it ended with his diagnosis of ALS. And 2 years later, passed away on June 2nd. And there's a group of people who have ALS, who are family members of those with ALS, who have lost family members and friends to ALS, who have gotten together over the last 2 years and pushed for the idea of a Lou Gehrig Day on June 2nd, the day that he passed away, as well as the day of his first start for his 2,130 consecutive games played streak. And it took a while to happen. They felt like they had hit a brick wall at one point, but this band of very, very strong, passionate, committed people went to 3 club presidents, Dave St. Peter of the Twins, Derek Hall of the Diamondbacks, and Sam Kennedy of the Boston Red Sox, and asked them to reach out to their fellow team presidents because they were stuck at just 7 teams. Within 24 hours, every other team in baseball had committed to a Lou Gehrig Day on June 2nd. And when that happened, the group was able to go to Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball is not going to sit here and mandate a day and, foist it on these teams that already have, some of whom have individual ALS awareness days. But when you got all 30 teams on board, you can go to Major League Baseball and say, hey, by the way, guys, everyone wants to do this. What are you waiting for? And they weren't waiting for anything except to make this announcement last week. And I think June 2nd is going to be a really cool day this year and for many, many years going forward.
I'm going to combine two questions here for you. If the
Oh
Royals
boy.
are not a playoff team, are they a 500 team? And with the depth that you just talked about, is Whit Merrifield or any other player going to be trade bait coming July to make room for Bobby Witt?
Well, I think the latter depends on how close to 500 they are. And I think the former depends on how healthy they stay and how healthy other teams stay. They're not as good as the White Sox. The White Sox have an incredible young core. Luis Robert in center field, Eloy Jimenez in either a corner or at DH, Yohan Moncada at third base, Tim Anderson at shortstop, Nick Madrigal at second base, Andrew Vaughn at first base, Jose Abreu, Yasmani Grandal at catcher. They signed Adam Eaton and brought him back this offseason. It's a really, really good offensive team. Is their pitching going to be good enough? I mean, Lucas Giolito has looked like a frontline starter in the last couple of years, and they traded for Lance Lynn this offseason, and Dallas Keuchel, a free agent signing, was really good the year before. Michael Kopech, a guy who's thrown a fastball 104 miles per hour, is coming off Tommy John surgery. He's going to be back. And they've got a deep, deep bullpen. They got all the pieces in place to be a World Series team this year. That being said, the projection models don't like the White Sox very much. And, as someone who does, I think that's probably a flaw of the models, but who am I to question artificial intelligence and what it's going to tell us? The Twins, who the models do like as the best team in the Central, have been doing this for 3 years now. And, they're going to be adding Alex Kirilloff, who's a big bat in the outfield, and they went and signed Andrelton Simmons. So now up the middle, you've got Byron Buxton, who might be the best defensive center fielder in baseball, Andrelton Simmons, who's among, if not the best shortstops, and Jorge Polanco, who's a shortstop who's going to be moving over to second. The up the middle defense there with the Twins is phenomenal, and they've got enough pitching. Did they go out and get the abundance that they need? No, but there are possibilities for them via trade, and I think the Twins are going to be awfully formidable this year. And then there are the Indians, who traded Francisco Lindor, but they've still got Shane Bieber and Zach Plesac and Aaron Savali and Tristan McKenzie. They've got a really good rotation, and they're every night, because they're going to throw a starting pitcher out there who can throw 7 shutout innings, they're going to be a tough out. And so it wouldn't shock me to see the Royals finish behind the Indians potentially. I think they're in that 3rd or 4th place territory. And I do think 500 is a realistic possibility this year. Yeah. But if they're under it, and a trade for Whit Merrifield where they're going to get younger and get better is out there, then yeah, that's well within the realm of possibility. I've had many a conversation with Dayton Moore, though, where he has said, I do not want to trade Whit Merrifield. And, he's had opportunities to in the past and hasn't done it. So I don't think that's going to happen. But if it were to, and maybe I sound like callous, non-fan here, it wouldn't be the worst thing either, maybe for Whit and the Royals both. If he's got a better chance to go win a championship elsewhere, then hey, I don't see that as a bad outcome.
We saw your tweet about Therese Paylor, the T-shirt to honor him and the scholarship at Howard University. And incidentally, our club voted yesterday to contribute to that fund. Do you have a good story or memory of Therese and crossing paths with him over the years?
Therese started at Yahoo while I was still there, and he was really nervous to come on because he'd been at the Star for a long time. And it's a big jump to go from covering a single team to covering the national beat. And he just, he asked great questions. What I loved most about Therese is how much he cared and how hard he worked. I was talking with a friend yesterday about what makes a reporter great. And to me, the word I always use is motor. Do you have the motor to get up early in the morning, to make the phone calls and send the texts that you have to make, and to do it in the afternoon, and to do it at night, and to do it in the middle of the night, and then to sleep much less than you should, and to wake up the next day and do it again, and then the next day, and then the next day, and then the next day. And then the day after that is the weekend, and you have to wake up and do it again. And it is a 24/7, 365 job. Just like when you're doing news, the news never sleeps. And so you kind of can't either. And Therese embraced that. He loved that. He was a guy who would sit there and just gobble up film because he wanted to get smarter and wanted to understand what was going on, and wanted the ability to talk about it and to be different. There was never anything fake about Therese. Like he wanted to be the real deal. And from that conversation with him that day, I learned everything I needed to know about him, that it mattered to him to be great. And anyone who's willing to put in the work to be great is an A+ in my book.
Well, he was a regular visitor to us at the flea market, and back to when he covered Mizzou for the Star, and
Of course.
the two descriptions everybody said of him: likable, and he did his homework, and he
Yeah.
so. In one of your previous visits with the club, you proposed a radical change to draft order. Rather than rewarding ineptitude or tanking, you reward an effort to keep trying to improve. Had anyone listened to your idea?
Let's put it this way. I think the most important point that the MLBPA is going to raise with MLB this time around in collective bargaining negotiations is competitiveness, or anti-competitiveness from a number of teams out there, and what that does to the free agent market and what that does to the game in general. When you have teams that are not bringing up their best players at the beginning of the season, because keeping them down for 2 weeks means that you get to keep them for an extra year on the end of their contract, there's something that's just not right about that. There's something that's not right about the best players in the world not being with teams for reasons of manipulation. There's something wrong with teams that are incentivized to lose, that if you lose, you end up giving yourself a better future. And so if there are modes or methods that you can put into place to ensure that the draft, which is arguably the greatest place to get surplus value for teams that there is, because the amount of money that teams spend in the draft is capped. So when you're getting a player, let's say you're getting the number 1 overall pick, you're spending $8 million on it. Seems like a lot of money, right? That player historically has produced over his first 6 years in the major leagues value in excess of $75 million. And you're not going to be paying him nearly that much over that time. So you're talking about an enormous surplus right there, just with one player. Of course, you're going to lose in order to get that number 1 pick if you can. But if there are modes or methods in place to preclude that from happening, maybe these teams that are wanting to lose right now look at the calculus and say, well, I guess losing doesn't pay off anymore. What am I going to get to do to win? Or how do I win? And if you have that in place, I think baseball is a much better game because of it. And so I hope that there are measures that they discuss and ultimately implement that don't make the draft a linear worst to best in reverse order situation.
Follow-up question to that: what other big concessions are the players looking for in the CBA?
I mean, they would love to become free agents more quickly than 6 years, which actually, with service time manipulation often is more like 7 years for players. I think one big thing is getting players paid earlier, and that's not just with the idea that the minimum salary is going to be raised. You have to look at what's happened in free agency over the last 10 or so years. Really, maybe even more like the last 5 years. When you hit 30 years old, you better be really, really good or have extremely good metrics that support the idea that you're going to be really, really good going forward, because teams treat guys, generally speaking, especially, top of the class guys, not so much, but especially middle tier free agents. If your age starts with a 3, just going to flick you to the side. And the unions, the union doesn't like that. Like these are tenured members here who are wearing it the hardest, but they're also being realistic and thinking, well, players who aren't over 30 are going to be getting paid, then players who are under 30 should be getting paid more. And not just $100,000, raising the minimum salary on the bottom. We're talking like the Fernando Tatis Jr. contract. And I don't know if you guys saw that, but Tatis Jr. is 22 years old. He has not even had, between an injury shortened first season and a pandemic shortened second, has not even played a full season's worth of games, and got signed to a 14-year, $340 million contract. Now that's how you give players money early. You guarantee it to them early in their career. And did Fernando Tatis Jr. Potentially give up some money? Sure. I mean, if he had signed, for example, a 6-year deal with a couple of club options, just a 6-year deal, let's say, and gone out to free agency at 28. That 6-year deal would have been probably 125 million, and then he could have gone out and cashed in for 400 million at 28 years old. But who knows what's going to happen between now and then? Who knows what the economics are going to look like? Who knows, God help us, if another pandemic is going to hit? I mean, who would have ever anticipated the world being what it has turned into in the past year? So getting guys paid earlier is definitely a part of it. And the problem is, while the Padres gave it was a really good deal. 340 million guaranteed at any point is a good thing. You still see teams shopping around and trying to sign players to deals that are very below market. And if you're going to get these guys locked up, then pay them early, pay them what they deserve, pay them what they warrant, pay them what they should be getting. And that's going to be, I think, the loudest point that the MLBPA is going to say in these negotiations.
Got time for a couple more?
Sure.
How many years are we away from the electronic strike zone?
1.
Really?
Would it surprise me to see it in 2022? No. But there's the chance, I think, that they have it in all the big league ballparks in 2022 to see how it works and to see it in practice the way that we've seen it. They have it at spring training sites, for example, and they have it in the Florida State League, and they've been using it. So they may put it in place for a year just to gather data and see if it's ready to be used in a major league game, but it will be here sooner than later. And I think in all likelihood, the way that this thing turns out is in the collective bargaining agreement. Major League Baseball will have the right to put the system into stadiums in 2022. And by the way, this is not something that I know or have reported. This is just my best guess as to what it would look like. They would get permission to put it in 2022 and gather data. And based on what the data says, MLB would have the option then to implement it before the 2023 season. But or 2024 or 2025, they'll have the yearly right to do it. It's coming though. Like it's an inevitability at this point.
With revenue loss from empty stadiums and arenas, do you see other sports are considering expansion? Will baseball expand?
They're saying that they won't right now. That is not a priority. And, I understand there was revenue loss last year. They also didn't have to pay a bunch of employees. And I don't think baseball crying poor is a particularly realistic thing. They also didn't have to pay players. They paid players 37% of what they normally do. So, I don't know if Danny Parkins ever came to talk with you guys when he was in Kansas City, but I was texting with him earlier today, and he said the Cubs president of business operations was on his station in Chicago earlier today and said that at 20% capacity, which is what Chicago's going to have on opening day, the Cubs financially are a break-even team. If all it takes is 20% to make them a break-even team, think about what it would take or what their finances look like when they're at 100% capacity in normal times. Baseball teams have been making money hand over fist for years. I don't want to hear Bill DeWitt, the Cardinals owner, say that baseball is not a business, not a money-making operation. It is. You wouldn't own the business otherwise. You would sell it. It's not just a vanity play. There's vanity stuff involved in it, of course, but baseball is a wonderful business. If it weren't, franchise values would not have gone up as much as they have in the last decade. And they've gone up significantly to the point where the Royals, who David Glass bought for $90 million, was it $100 million?
90 million.
It was 90 or 100, sold them for 1.2 billion. Yeah, businesses don't operate in a fashion where if you don't make money, your value multiplies by 13 times. That's just not that's not a thing. That's not how the world works. So, yeah, I don't sit here and shed a single tear for baseball teams. They're going to be just fine.
Let's wrap up. Give us your predictions on the World Series. Can the Dodgers be beat? If so, who?
I think the best chance for someone to beat the Dodgers is not in the World Series. It's in the National League Championship Series against the San Diego Padres. The Padres are good. They're deep. They're fun. Like if you get the MLB package this year and you're a night owl and you want to stay up late and watch enjoyable baseball, Padres is the team to watch. And the Dodgers are great too. And I haven't gotten to the point of my World Series pick yet, but nothing has convinced me to go against the Dodgers right now. I still do, the American League is like, it's deep, but not deep with great teams. I know the Yankees are projected to be really, really good this year. I think a lot of that's going to depend on the health of Corey Kluber and Jameson Taillon, one guy who's pitched one inning the last 2 years, and another who is coming off his second Tommy John surgery. Those aren't guys who typically you bet on, but they're both extremely talented. So if the Yankees pitching stays healthy, I think the Yankees are the team to beat. But I ran through the White Sox lineup with you guys earlier, and through their team, they're really, really good. And I see them as much as anyone as a threat. And it's going to be interesting to see Tony La Russa managing that team. I mean, he hasn't done it in a decade now, and he's working with an awful lot of talent.
That was an interesting choice as manager.
And it was.
Jeff, I think we could talk to you all day. You are the best and so knowledgeable, and we really appreciate your time and want to be respectful of it. So we will wrap it up. Thank you again. We look forward to reading more of your pieces on ESPN and seeing you on TV throughout the season.
Guys, it's always a pleasure. Appreciate you having me, and thank you for the thoughtful questions, and thank you for donating to Terez's scholarship too. Really do appreciate that.
We're big fans of his. Hey, folks, next week we will have Mizzou Athletics Director Jim Sterk, and it's the first time he's been with us this year with spring football underway and the NCAA tournament starting next week. There'll be lots to talk about. In 2 weeks, we'll have more Royals talk with Alex Lewis, who covers the team for the Athletic. Thanks for joining us today. As always, we welcome your feedback at info@kctigerclub.com. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week with Jim Sterk.